Welcome to the World War I podcast, produced by the MacArthur Memorial. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore a wide range of interesting topics related to World War I. This podcast is sponsored by the Ernst and Gertrude Tico Charitable Foundation. General Douglas MacArthur is arguably the most decorated American military officer in American history. For a career that spanned 5 conflicts and about 50 years of active duty, it is an impressive record. His service in World War I accounts for nearly 20% of his more than 100 decorations, and many military historians view the combination and number of his American and international honors from 1917 to 1918 as truly unique. What do we know about these awards and the circumstances behind them? Well, that is our topic today, and we're delighted to be joined by Sherman Fleek, a military historian and former command historian at West Point, who has published on General Douglas MacArthur and on the United States Military Academy. Thank you for joining us today.
It's an honor to be here.
So why don't you start us off with a brief overview of MacArthur's World War I service?
World War I, of course, started in 1914, but the United States did not enter the conflict till April of 1917. At that time, Major MacArthur was on the War Department staff. He was what we would call probably the first information or public affairs officer the Army ever had. He did news releases and so on. He worked directly with Secretary of War Newton Baker, and when the war kicked off, he eventually became appointed to be the chief of staff of the 42nd Division, which was National Guard Division of 4 different states, regiments from 4 different states, and it became known as the Rainbow Division. So he deployed, went overseas. One of the first 4 divisions was the 42nd. They went into the line in February of 1918, and there were like 7 campaigns that Douglas MacArthur served in through the end of the war with the Meuse-Argonne. He was eventually promoted to brigadier general and took command in the end of July with the 84th Brigade. And so he saw a lot of action. And as chief of staff, it is the key officer that handles personnel, oversees the logistics, operations, planning, all that to support the division commander.
Do you want to share with us a little bit about the evolution of some of the awards we're going to be talking about?
The United States is a strange country, okay? When the colonists broke away from England and Great Britain and during the American Revolution, there were many institutions they did not want to adopt in America. They didn't even want a standing army. But because of George Washington's amazing feat and the moral person that he was not an American Oliver Cromwell, they satisfied having a navy and an army. But one thing they didn't want was awards and decorations. They didn't want any type of orders, meaning the sense of orders of aristocracy, where you're a baron, a marquis, a duke, none of that, all right? That was all thrown to the wayside. Along with that was military decorations. So we had, in the United States Army, Navy, until really the Civil War, no awards. When there was bravery on the battlefield in those early days, you could be breveted to a higher rank. U.S. Grant went into the Mexican War as a 2nd lieutenant. By the end of the war, he had been promoted to 1st lieutenant by pay, but he was a captain by brevet rank, honorary rank. And Robert E. Lee had 3 brevet promotions during the Mexican War also. And there was a certificate of merit that commanders would fill out on brave soldiers, usually officers, but enlisted also, and that went a lot. Now, the British system had a thing where if you were mentioned in a dispatch in the British Army, colonial armies, European armies, that is like hitting the front page of the headline news. 1861 rolls around, Civil War, and the Navy passes through Congress, some congressmen, a Medal of Honor for sailors and petty officers who are brave in combat, valorous, and also their sterling character as a seaman. So it's both valor and service. The next year, the Army adopts it, the Medal of Honor. Now, let me say it right now. It's not the Congressional Medal of Honor. It is the Medal of Honor, and you don't win it. You don't earn it. You are awarded it, and you're a recipient or an awardee. Then in 1863, the Medal of Honor was extended to officers of the Army, but not the Navy until World War I, 1917, 1918, an interesting aspect. Another thing about the Medal of Honor, through all those years, the Indian Wars up through the Spanish-American War, sailors could receive the Medal of Honor for non-combat heroism in saving other sailors, going down and rescuing submariners or trapped in submarines in the 1920s and so on. Right up to 1942 was the last Navy Medal of Honor for non-combat. So up through the World War I, 1917, the War Department, Navy Department, Congress pushes through several wars. Both services have a Distinguished Service Medal, and both services have a Distinguished Service Cross. It's called the Navy Cross or Distinguished Service Cross. So the Medal of Honor in the hierarchy is the highest award for valor. The second is Distinguished Service Cross. Then you have the Distinguished Service Medal, which is peacetime or non-combat. And then the next one is the Silver Star, as we call it today, the Star Citation, which is originally was a 3x16 little silver star that one would pin onto their campaign ribbon or the World War I victory ribbon. And for each award of that award, you would get another star. Then in 1932, the chief of staff by the name of Douglas MacArthur,
right,
with the help of the War Department and Congress, actually established the Silver Star. Now, of course, we got the Bronze Star and all these, but there were no awards for the first 70 years in the U.S. Army to the Civil War. Then the next 50 years, there was only the one. And now we have a lot of awards for a lot of things.
Well, thank you for that overview. Before we talk about the decorations that MacArthur did receive, I thought it would be interesting to start by talking about one that he does not receive in World War I, the Medal of Honor. He's nominated for it, but what can you tell us about the circumstances behind this and then the decision not to award?
This is a fascinating story, and I don't think anyone knows it completely. There's a lot of documentation. It's interesting. So the way awards normally occur is an act of heroism, valor is witnessed. If you don't have someone to witness it and you do something all by yourself, it's kind of tricky. And that goes up through the chain of command. And by 1917 and 18, there were laws enacted by then from the Civil War days, what the Medal of Honor is, above and beyond the call of duty, putting yourself in extreme risk. And many of these aspects, which were codified by law, by the Congress, and or regulation in the services. And then in the local area, General Pershing overseas in the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force, had a process, documents, and procedures on how to do this with witnesses and statements and things that sometimes you need drawings and sketchings of what happened and so on. These were all part of it. So MacArthur, during the fight on the 14th, 15th, 16th of October, 1918, Côte-Châtillon, with the 42nd Division. Now he's commanding the 84th Brigade. He has two regiments under his command. And they, the 167th from Alabama and the 168th from, I think, Iowa, isn't it? Iowa. Hellacious fight. MacArthur's there right in the middle of it. You have General Menover, who is the commanding general of the 42nd, but then he changes out with General Flagler, I think his name is. And so he gets testimonials or statements from several people, some junior officers, a Major Ross and a Lieutenant Weller, Reginald Weller. They saw exactly what MacArthur did, how he orchestrated the fight. He made adjustments on the battlefield. He never carried a weapon with him, okay, though, World War I. He didn't carry a weapon. But he was up front, adjusting things, giving orders, inspiring the troops, And it was so profound that there were actually dozens of statements that came forward eventually of his valor. So he was recommended for the Medal of Honor, and there were lists that were tabulated with the following documentation. Then in the AEF, there were boards of officers who considered it. It would go up through General Pershing, who would recommend it. By this time, the law had finally came forth that only the President of the United States could recommend, that doesn't mean pin on the award, but approve the Medal of Honor. So you have to go back to Washington, D.C., telegrams, all that, pushing things, paperwork, documentation, all that. It's a little time-consuming. So for a couple months, it's in limbo, and lo and behold, there's lists made for the 42nd Division, and MacArthur's name's on it. In fact, being the senior ranking guy, he was on the top of the list. And so there's an interesting document here about the 84th Infantry Brigade on December 16th, 1918. Now they're in Germany in occupation, and MacArthur's name is right at the top, but next to it, penciled in, is disagree, as best as I can tell. M.H. Medal of Honor. Some are deceased, some are enlisted, and one's a captain, first lieutenant, sergeants. So I did a count the other day, 124 Medal of Honor recipients in the Army during the World War I. There were like 32 that were officers, but none were general officers. So there is an opinion among some historians that General Pershing, as the AEF commander, is as his absolute obligation as commander, approve or disapprove, but it would be fair if he did it using certain standards and was fair to everyone else, and not just because of a person's rank, which is possible, which I think, because he was a general officer, and the highest rank was Lieutenant Colonel Pike, who was a West Point graduate. He was killed in combat and received the Medal of Honor. And it's interesting. That's one aspect. And the other aspect, being human, maybe there's an aspect where there's a personal thing. Now, I just want to take a moment and read a line here from a historian, Arthur Herman. You've probably heard of him. This is from his book. This recommendation, supported later by General Flagler, also was denied by General Pershing. Biographer Arthur Herman unabashedly declared, in the end, MacArthur did not receive the Medal of Honor. It was Pershing, and Pershing alone, who finally blocked the award. I'm of the opinion, for some reason, MacArthur definitely, there's no doubt he deserved it, without a doubt, if you read all those accounts of what he did during those 3 days and why Pershing didn't do it. And as far as we know, I think there's no record why he did so, other just disagree.
It does seem like an odd case, and I would say, at least in my personal opinion, I think I agree with you. I think that World War I in this instance probably would have been a very legitimate point to award him that medal. But, like we said, he does not receive that award. He does, however, receive 2 Distinguished Service Crosses.
Yes.
What can you tell us about these?
Well, they're also interesting. The first one was early in the fight, February, where he was in MacArthur went out as chief of staff. He went out on patrols, reconnaissance patrols. What a lot of people don't realize, when they have visions of World War I, you have trenches, yes, barbed wire, yes, and then there's shell holes all over the place, and all the trees are cut down, and it just looks like the moon. Well, that's a good share of the Western Front, but not totally. So the Germans at night would move their fighting positions around, as the Americans and the British did, and then they would change the wire. So you have wire and entrance. If you're going to attack, you got to get through those your own wire defenses to go attack the enemy. So they were constantly changing the wire, constantly moving machine gun positions and mortar positions around. So intelligence is so important. MacArthur would go out on these patrols with sergeants and captains and 8 or 10 troops, and one of the big things that they were looking for was the lay of the land and what changes were made, and they would try to capture some German soldiers. because back in World War One, it wasn't a big thing about only, name, rank, serial number, date of birth. They said, oh, yeah, we have all these Germans, over here, and the machine guns, yeah, you'll never get through. There wasn't that called. They were just happy to be alive, not in the fight. So he would go out on these patrols, and that's how he received 7 Silver Stars over time. And then this first Distinguished Service Cross, they were in this operation. There were several patrols at night and intelligence gathering missions, which ended up into almost a night fight, and some 600 Germans were captured through this process. In the end, I think it was February 28th, around there, 1918. And so he eventually, in a few weeks, received the Distinguished Service Cross, which was number 2 after the Medal of Honor. And he got the, I think, Croix de Guerre from the French that also. So that's 2 awards, and he was rightly thrilled about that.
Moving down the list of American awards, we then come to the Silver Star, and he ends World War I with 7 citation stars that you mentioned earlier, later becomes the Silver Star. Can you tell us what he is doing on the battlefield to merit 7 Silver Stars? That is, I think, unusual.
One of the most important things in combat is leadership. Where your leaders, be it General Grant, General Washington, Napoleon, you're willing to take the risk with your soldiers. Be out there in the front lines. That doesn't mean you always have to be there all the time because you've got other responsibilities. But to be there, be involved, and understand what's going on. So with those reconnaissance patrols he went on, they weren't fighting every day and every night. This would be maybe 3 or 4 different reconnaissances a month, maybe, depending on the operation. When the Germans launched their huge Ludendorff offensives in March through June of 1918, then, of course, the activity on the Western Front really just exploded, literally. So there were more and more patrols, and if you look at the dates of some of these, they're quite close together, and especially in the spring and summer of 1918. I've heard of people complaining, some professional officers, and I've known, they said, what the hell is MacArthur doing out there in the front lines? His job is to be back and manage all the logistics, make sure all the troops are ready, and the two regimental commanders and Chief of Staff has got 4 regimental commanders actually, and the 2 brigade commanders have all the information they need. And I said, well, how better to brief them on the information of the battlefield if you're out there yourself and you see it? They said, well, it was really not his place. He said, and I say, it's up to him, all right? And his division commanders never scolded him. They were concerned about him. And I will say this right now. I think Douglas MacArthur, I don't know if he had a death wish or what, but he did not give a flip whether he was killed or wounded. He really didn't. I mean, even through World War II, he was there. He was a soldier. This was his calling. He did those reconnaissance. And when there was the major offensives, attacks, counterattacks, and so on, he was right there too. I think at the Côte de Châtillon, he'd been up like 4 straight nights. Mm-hmm. And finally... And
he's sick sometimes.
Yeah, and he'd been gassed twice. He'd been sick and everything. He refused to carry a gas mask. Often he didn't wear his helmet, which that helmet wasn't the best. I call it the saucer pan helmet, M1917. And he went... Sometimes he wore his West Point sweater underneath his uniform. He loved the West Point, of course, but he just didn't care. He was going to do what he thought was right. So those soldiers shouldn't go into the fight just to get awards. Shouldn't. But there's a maxim from Napoleon Bonaparte. A soldier will do unbelievable things for a piece of metal and a piece of ribbon. Now, MacArthur's been accused of being a award hunter, and that's not true at all, in my estimation. In fact, in his autobiography, he makes the comment that when he was denied the Medal of Honor, he was more than happy that he received his 2nd Distinguished Service Cross. Let me just read this to you. I was also recommended for the Medal of Honor, but the awards board at Chaumont disapproved. It awarded me, however, a second Distinguished Service Cross. Citation more than satisfied my martial vanity. So I hope that wraps it up a little bit of what he was doing. And I just can't think of a better example of coming back, briefing senior commanders as a colonel. You got other colonels and the 2 brigadier generals and the commanding general, 2-star, lay of the land, where the enemy forces are, avenues of approach, measures they need to take, equipment they need to carry, distances, time, light, all that. Yeah. So it's critical.
I think that you also have to think a little bit about the men under his command and what they thought of him. I think if he was this award-grabbing officer, I think there would be a lot of evidence, some oral history, some letters. But what we do see in the evidence is they're calling him the fighting D'Artagnan of the 42nd Division. I mean, they think he is very brave, very courageous. And sadly, I think for him, that is not how all of his troops view him in the Second World War. Different role, right?
Yes.
He's playing a very different role. But I think in World War I think he has the admiration of the 42nd Division, for sure.
By example. So in the modern Army, we have the commissary for food. Then you have the post exchange called the PX for all the other stuff that you can get on discount for your family and everything. And in the PX, you usually have the clothing sales store, military clothing sales, where you can get your awards and new uniforms and stuff like that and replenish your other things. So those who are award hunters, we call them PX heroes.
Okay. I had not heard that before.
Heroes.
Okay. All right. So this is backtracking a little bit, but I know we have a lot of listeners in the United Kingdom and France and Commonwealth nations, and I've read that the citation star, that silver star now, is comparable to being mentioned in dispatches, and I wanted to get your take on that. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
I think it is, because I know some other experts have shared that idea. There's awards, and then there's ribbons, and you can get awards now for marksmanship and do all kinds of things. Then there's the higher awards. So the triad of valor in the American Army and is the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Navy Cross, Air Force Cross, and then the Silver Star. Then you got the others, all right? So in a era where you don't have all the electronics we have today and other things, to write out a dispatch or an after-action report from the Crimean War or in the South African War, the Civil War. If you mention Captain Smith did this and Sergeant Jones did that, that is big juju. That's huge. It's big. It's really important. Gets into the record. So dispatches is a method of doing it. We call them in the Army the after-action reports, and the Civil War ORs, the official records of the Civil War. That's 90% of that is the after-action reports that Grant and Sherman and Sheridan wrote, and they would mention soldiers or this commander did that. Then sometimes they say, well, I wish Smith would have done a better job, or Hooker failed to do that. Mm-hmm. So that is equivalent. It's just two different communities, two different modes and of processes of doing things.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the Army Distinguished Service Medal. He receives one of these during World War I, and It's actually his first of 6 Distinguished Service Medals that he receives in his career. He's got, I think, 5 Army and 1 Navy. What can you tell us about his World War I Army Distinguished Service Medal?
That award was more so for his brilliant leadership and administration, organizing a division from nothing. There were others did it too at the same time, of course. I mean, there were some great staff officers in World War I, Marshall, Hugh Drum, and the rest of them, Fox Connor. There's some great officers that didn't get out into the fight where MacArthur did. But he was the chief of staff, so he had to organize the division of 4 regiments, 4 different states, all National Guardsmen, which they got draftees. So you have a 27,000-man unit. and you're chief of staff, and you answer to 2-star. All right, MacArthur, what's going on with the bedding? What's going on with the lodging, that transportation? When are we going down to the Hoboken to catch our ships? What ships do we have? That's all he is. You get all those people over to France. You know how many hamburgers that takes in one day? How much toilet paper for 27,000 people? It's amazing. And I kid you not, they didn't have bathrooms all the time, so you had to go out and do slit trenches. So it's just hygiene, all that, medical supplies, ammunition, all of it had to be arranged for. So being chief of staff, that's why he received that award for the most part, was that. Now, when he was brigade commander, he had his own chief of staff and others working, and they were, of course, always coordinating with division and what they needed and so on. So it's always a coordination, leadership, projecting, planning mode, always.
Now for the Purple Heart. In 1932, he retroactively receives 2 Purple Hearts for wounds sustained in World War I. Tell us about this.
Purple Heart is a fascinating American story. It is now the Purple Heart. And in 1917, they issued wound chevrons that would go on the right sleeve. If you were wounded, you got a little notch V, like a corporal stripe or private stripe, a wound chevron, like the old Chevron gas station. So if you're wounded, you'd get one. You get wounded again. Now, what is a wound? You're physically shot, you're gassed, where you're incapacitated. All right. So those are aspects of wounds. And then in 1932, well, MacArthur was gassed twice, and he hurt himself that way, falling down and so on a little bit when he was gassed, and because he refused to wear his gas mask. And he was hospitalized, kind of, but he, of course, broke rules and went back to the fight and everything. So fast forward 20 years, he's now chief of staff of the Army, and being a student of history, he realizes that in 1782, Commander-in-Chief George Washington issued 3 what is called the Badge of Military Merit. What they were silk purple hearts with the word merit written across it with 1 T and 1 R. MERIT, to 3 enlisted soldiers at the Newburgh Cantonment, which is about 20 miles north of West Point. It's those 2 years between the Yorktown surrender with Cornwallis and then the end of the war with the Treaty of Paris. So he awards these 3 NCOs, they're all sergeants, I think, Elijah Churchill. Daniel Bissell later was involved with the Lewis and Clark expedition, not on it, but he helped supply it. And the other fellow's name?
William Brown.
So they were all enlisted, not officers. So MacArthur wisely took that aspect and that it would be an award. Now, originally, the Purple Heart was not only just for wounds received and death, but it was also used for service. A lot of awards have 2 or 3 different evolutions. So from 32 up through World War II a little bit, the Purple Heart was also used as an award for service. And of course, the military of the United States has changed their standards of what a wound is many, many times. Now they're talking about traumatic brain injuries and PTSD and all this, that some of the old salts have a hard time. You don't see blood, you're not wounded. Well, okay. I mean, when you get gas attack, you don't have any blood either. But that was his idea. And he received the very first Silver Star. Purple Heart has number 1. A lot of people think General MacArthur's kind of arrogant about things at times. It was issued to him in his office when they had the big celebration on George Washington's birthday in February 1932, 200 years to the day that George was born, in Newburgh, where the Purple Heart Hall of Valor is today. And he wasn't there for it. Now, if he was an attention goer, that's where he would go, but he didn't. He was doing other things. So that's the story behind the Purple Heart.
Moving on to his foreign awards now. Can you give us just a brief overview of these?
MacArthur has dozens. How many foreign awards? A bunch. A lot of them use some of the same terms that, like the Croix de Guerre is in Belgium. It's in France. It's used for other countries too. Military crosses are very famous. Sometimes with awards, you are knighted. With the British and other countries who have monarchs, you're knighted. Like that happens. And so he received these amazing awards over time from World War I, and then, of course, in World War II, others. And it's just amazing. You see George Patton with the same thing. They often come with sashes, and they're very artistic, and they're very, very interesting and showy, ostentatious in a way. But those awards, MacArthur was really touched and honored to have, as any soldier would, because a foreign dignitary, government, the king, the queen, recognizes his valor and service.
And I think when people see his international awards on display here, and obviously we can't put them all on display, but I think when people come here, they tend to think that all of the foreign awards and decorations are from World War II, or even his time as Chief of Staff of the Army, or maybe the Korean War. He's receiving the Legion of Honor, from France. Now, obviously not the highest level yet. I think that doesn't happen until World War II. But like you said, he's going to receive other lesser French awards, Belgian awards, Italy's War Merit Cross.
Yeah, the Cross of War, yes.
I think it... and a lot of officers, like you mentioned, like Patton, are also receiving. So there's some aspect of this that's kind of generic. You served in this war with us as an ally. Here's this award. But I think MacArthur's, when you look through some of the citations, do seem a little bit more personalized, at least for some of them.
Yes.
And something that was very recommended by his foreign coalition partners that were on the ground with him. So I think those are really interesting, and I hope someone will do a lot more research on those. Now, this might be maybe a little off topic for where we're going right now, but I did read that MacArthur, he didn't like oak leaves. He didn't like any devices like that he tended to want to just wear all of them. Have you heard, and I've heard that he was also willing to wear, like if he got a lower level of the Legion of Honor and then, a higher grade, that he was willing to wear all of them sometimes. Now, I don't know how you would fit all those, by 1920 on your uniform, but have you heard that? Was he opposed to wearing those devices that denote multiple awards?
So the oak leaves from World War I were huge. I don't know if you've seen them. They're about 5 times the size. So to put an oak leaf on the Silver Star, there was no Silver Star ribbon, all right? So he had all those oak leaves. Well, after 1932, I've seen pictures too, I think, and he has all these huge oak leaves on the Silver Star ribbon. I haven't seen any documentation or anything where he believes one thing or another. He wasn't the only one that did it. So to be a soldier, sometimes there's always the fine line between arrogance and confidence, right? We all loved 3rd grade when we could bring in our show and tell. So he was proud of his service and his achievements, but not to the extent that some people accuse him of today, is my opinion.
Agreed. So there is debate whether MacArthur is the most decorated U.S. serviceman, and we'll talk about that more on our other podcast, the MacArthur Memorial Podcast. But since our focus here is just World War I, where do you think he ranks among U.S. service members in the First World War?
He's certainly, I couldn't give you a number like number 7 or 12 or whatever. If you look at the Medal of Honor and assign a merit of order number to it, like 100 or 50 points or something like that, and you do that with other awards, then 7 silver stars and a Distinguished Service Cross, Distinguished Service Medal, 2 Purple Hearts, that's quite a bit. But he didn't receive the Medal of Honor, which puts anyone who receives the Medal of Honor in a whole separate category. But just the sheer amount of actions and fights and what he did in the awards. And here is a staff officer out there for the 7 or 8 months doing this without a weapon, and then he becomes the brigade commander. So it's an interesting aspect, but he is definitely in the higher echelon of those who received awards for that particular conflict. Minus, of course, the Medal of Honor. But we all know he should have received it. Would have been a second one, actually. He should have got it in Mexico, 1914. But
yeah. You think 1914 he should have received?
Oh, absolutely.
You do?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one thing real quick. World War I, there's 19 Americans who have received 2 awards of the Medal of Honor. There's 19. Some were from the Civil War, other conflicts. But with the Marines, the 2 Marine regiments was in the 2nd Infantry Division, which was a U.S. division, commanded by Marine Major General John Lejeune, Camp Lejeune. And some of the Marines were awarded the Navy Medal of Honor, plus the Army Medal of Honor for the same action. So there is a lot of ambiguity and confusion and cheating, cutting corners and loopholes that awards system has gone through the last 80 or 90, 100 years.
Okay. In the intro, I mentioned that MacArthur's awards say something about his valor and leadership in key moments. And some people like to call him Dugout Doug, and they'll argue that all of his medals are just him, grabbing medals, patting himself on the back. And I think later on, there are probably some awards that I have some questions about. But when you look at these World War I medals, they all seem very legitimate. So can you just close by telling us, in your mind, what story do Douglas MacArthur's World War I decorations tell us about him?
The idea that he avoided combat, didn't want anything to do with it. Dugout Doug, of course, is from Corregidor and Bataan at the early stages of World War II. That is just a nomenclature that's come along. It's absolutely false in World War II, and it's more false in World War I. He could have sent majors and captains out to do what he did as a colonel, but he'd do it that way. He knew exactly what the operation was going to encounter and what his men and the other leaders would face out in that battle space. He didn't have to do that, but he did. Was he seeking awards? They were just coming out with those awards. No one really knew how the Medal of Honor had been around a while. But the Distinguished Service Cross, it was approved in 17. It was first issued in late 17 and 18. So they weren't even really on the table totally yet. So what is he seeking? To be in dispatches? To be the toast of the town back to the officers' club later? Is that what it's all about? To risk your life so many times? Or was he like Alexander the Great? He didn't care. He went forth. Grant, they went forth. They did their job. So it's just not only historically inaccurate, it's insulting. And it's unfair.
And I think he also thought, we mentioned Alexander the Great, and I think he always saw himself in that peer group too, which obviously bothers people a little bit. But if you legitimately believe that, and you believe you are a man of destiny, and you work 110% to do that, and you love your country, and you believe duty and honor are also important, there's General Douglas MacArthur.
Yes, he was a man of destiny. I think he knew it by the time he got to West Point. Especially with the pedigree he came from.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's
You're
always
welcome.
a pleasure chatting with you. And this has been a very interesting topic, and we appreciate your expertise. We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at macarthurmemorial@norfolk.gov or find us on X at MacArthur1880 or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.